Hello everyone, welcome to Puck in Modules. I'm your benevolent Dungeon Master Puck, and class is in session. So, I'm at a little bit of a problem here for doing Curse of Strahd. So we're doing Curse of Strahd today. Problem I have is Curse of Strahd is easily the most popular module that has ever been published for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. People love this module. I can log on to Twitch at any time of day and find people running this module. It's a hit. People love it. So, really, I could tell you that Curse of Strahd killed my dog and burnt my house down. It doesn't matter to you. You probably already bought it and played it. But I have a job to do. I got a video to make. So let's get into it. So we're going to change things up here a little bit. We're going to talk about Curse of Strahd. We're going to start out by going into a little bit of where Curse of Strahd came from, and then we're going to talk about the story of the campaign, and then we're going to talk about how the characters, settings, and scenarios can be used. Because in all honesty, there's not really any homebrew content in here that you can, or any module-specific content in here that you can lift for a homebrew game. Everything is very specific to this particular campaign. And even Strahd himself isn't that interesting as a stat block, but we'll get into it. Anyways, Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd is based on the very popular Ravenloft campaign from way back at the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons. It was created by Tracy and Laura Hickman. Nice little couple. Problem they had was Tracy went to a Dungeons & Dragons game, and he came back a bit upset because it was like, okay, it didn't really make sense that vampires were hanging out in these dungeons with all these goblins, bugbears, and slimes and stuff. So they decided to create a world that made narrative sense and a more narratively driven campaign for Dungeons & Dragons. And then they came up with the Ravenloft setting. Really cool. Really nice setup. Kind of created this spooky, scary thing. It was put out in as part of the Demi-Planes of Dread as part of a Halloween release way back in the day. And it's gone through a couple iterations since then. The most current one being, of course, Curse of Strahd. And I don't count Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft because that's not a campaign. That is a campaign setting, which, I mean, technically so is Curse of Strahd if you really put it in the broad strokes, but we'll get to that. Anyways, so Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd, basically, your party arrives in Barovia somehow, or they were already in Barovia. The campaign doesn't seem too concerned about whichever it is. It's got options for both. And then you're just basically escorted through a bunch of scary, kind of Halloween-y set pieces throughout Barovia before finally coming down to an epic encounter and fight with Strahd in Castle Ravenloft. That's the whole campaign in a nutshell. Narratively, the theme is Barovia is a scary, crazy place. It's kind of a weird, trapped prison where the people are going crazy, other people want to escape, and there's one guy sitting at the top of it all being, "Oh, if only I could find someone to take up my mantle. Then I could escape this dark prison. But sadly, no one is as great as I, Stratovon von Zarovich." So on. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, of course, but that's kind of his whole motivation. What I like about it is that throughout the whole campaign, Strahd's always kind of lurking in the background. He's menacing the players like a 90s cartoon villain, and it's an ever-present kind of looming threat as you progress through the campaign and gain levels to become strong enough to face it. Those of you who remember the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, that's a good character driver. If this dude keeps messing with you, you want to become powerful enough to defeat him. So in that respect, I really like what Curse of Strahd does with that. The other places and settings you go to, they're interesting. None of it's really groundbreaking, if I'm being completely honest. A lot of it is just like scary spooky witches and like, you know, all this mysterious murders and abductions and bodies and zombies, and there's a lot of Halloween kind of horror movie tropes that get thrown around throughout of it. But it's fun. It's interesting to play through. And part of what I believe makes Strahd so attractive for so many other people is it has a kind of randomizer setting through the Taraka deck. Tarot cards, basically. And the game sets up this whole scenario where you set up the Taraka deck and whatever cards are laid down kind of affect the locations of key NPCs and items and encounters throughout the game. Because of that, it creates a scenario where, you can't really play through Curse of Strahd two groups, it'll be different every time. And because of that, it has these scenarios where, oh, well, this is what happened to me, and this is what happened to me. It's a water cooler gaming moment. It's the kind of thing that you don't really get with a lot of games these days, especially with the internet and everything. I mean, most people know everything that's going to happen before it happens. And the way Curse of Strahd is built, both with the Taraka deck and with the layout of a lot of the maps, in fact, Ravenloft, the final encounter map, is huge and has multiple exits and entrances and ways to multiple levels throughout. Excuse me, I'm coming apart at the seams. So that all plays together to kind of make this an interesting and exciting, and I get why it's such a popular module. I'll be honest, when Curse of Strahd originally came out, I wasn't that psyched about it. I hadn't played any of the previous Ravenloft modules. And like, it just seemed, Vampire Castle seemed kind of pedestrian in a game where I can have space octopuses that eat brains. Like, it just seemed, I don't know, it seemed light by comparison, but I get now why people love it after having researched it and everything. All right, so go into Barovia, run around Barovia, find all the scary set pieces, and get menaced by Strahd, and eventually go face Strahd and fight him. That's the entirety of Curse of Strahd in a nutshell. It's a little bit hard to follow in the module, if I'm being completely honest, because the module takes you from, like, level 1 to, I believe it was, like, 15 or 16. I have to double-check that. But anyways, it takes you through all your leveling, but the problem is it doesn't do it linearly. You start at level 1 in Chapter 1, and then you go to Chapter 3, and then you go to Chapter 6, and then you go Chapter 9, and you go back to 4. I don't know what Wizards of the Coast has against linear storytelling, but they just don't do it in a lot of modules, and it kind of drives me nuts. That aside, let's talk about Barovia and Ravenloft. So we talked about where it was created and kind of how it came to be. The story behind Barovia and where it exists in the Forgotten Realms, if you run your homebrews in the Forgotten Realms and you're like, man, I'd like to put some of that Barovia, Ravenloft, Strahd sauce on this. Technically, the realm of Barovia resides in a demi-plane inside the Shadowfell. So it's a box within a box. Now, official canon says, you can't go, if you go in there, you can never leave, except everybody leaves. Lots of people have leaves. At least 3 adventuring parties have gotten in and out of Barovia over the course of it being a thing. Freaking Volo got in and out of Barovia. It's practically a tourist destination. So I would flavor it a little bit differently. I would say that the people who live in Barovia are trapped there forever. They're trapped there with Strahd. Strahd's trapped there with them. And that's the deal. I think it's not easy to get in and out, but enough people have made it a thing. It's not that much of a stretch if you want to add it to your campaign. Spooky Mist, and you get to Barovia, and then, I don't know, teleportation, you get out. If you've seen my most recent campaign, on the Mercs of Mischief on Sundays, you kind of get an idea of what I'm getting at here. So, throughout Barovia, we have it's a very unique setting. It's a very gothic horror, very Eastern European style of, there's this enormous spire, everybody is downtrodden and worried, and those who aren't downtrodden and worried are just, like, creepily upbeat, and the ones that aren't creepily upbeat are definitely insane. And it's a neat setting to play with. What I like more about it is I actually really like Strahd. I don't love Strahd as a stat block, though. Because if you actually look at Strahd's stat block, there's not a lot separating him from a conventional vampire spellcaster. He's got, like, 3 unique abilities beyond that, and they're not... it's not super exciting. So, if you were gonna adopt Strahd for your own campaigns, I would consider perhaps juicing him up with something, giving him something cooler and more interesting. You could theoretically take him out of Ravenloft for a homebrew campaign. I don't know if you'd want to do that because he's kind of synonymous with it, and I like the whole idea that he's trapped there. It creates a very interesting character. He's trapped there, but what I would do with him, because the current story has him as he's trapped in Ravenloft. He's looking for, he thinks his way out is if he gets an heir and a wife, then he'll be allowed to leave because he's passed on the family name or something. Whatever. That's kind of interesting, but not super interesting. These days, whenever you see like a vampire movie or vampire media or anything like that, the vampires always have this like enormous society with some head vampire king. I think it's a really good idea to introduce Strahd into one of those kinds of scenarios, but he's a kind of king in exile because he cannot return to the prime material. He can't exit the realm that he's in, so he kind of manages things from the background. And perhaps it's even just an honorary title. It's some interesting themes to play with, and definitely something that you could use. Other good stuff that you could take from this is just taking a look at the way the map of Ravenloft is designed. It is a beautifully laid out castle/dungeon map with just it's really labyrinthine it's a labyrinth, the way that it's laid out, and it gives you a really good idea about how to build your own dungeons. So even if you didn't want to take anything else out of the Curse of Strahd module, I recommend looking at the maps just to get some ideas of how you want to build your own maps and dungeons and encounters in the future. There's tons of good stuff in there. Yeah, so I mean, like I said, there's not really much for unique character. There's like a amber golem that's pretty neat. But beyond that, there's really nothing else in here that isn't just super unique to the module. So I would say that for homebrewers, the best thing that you can take from Curse of Strahd is it's an interesting template for kind of a scary Halloween setting. I would say there are a lot of ways to do better, so don't necessarily make it your whole praxis for doing a Halloween campaign or a scary campaign, because there are places you can go with it. The idea of a vampire lord king in exile with this crazy castle full of weird traps and all kinds of things is incredible in here, and you can definitely grab a lot of reference material from Curse of Strahd to use that kind of thing in your own campaigns. Beyond that, the Tiraka deck. If you ever wanted to take such a thing and adapt it for your own campaigns, it is an interesting way to add a little bit of randomness. So if you study the way the Tiraka deck works, it's not a far reach to take the different outcomes from the deck and then turn that into a bit of a randomizer for your own campaign. It creates a lot of character interaction, a lot of player interaction, and people seem to love it when you introduce it to campaigns. So I'd recommend giving that a try as well. And that's Curse of Strahd. It's a fun campaign. I enjoyed going through it piece by piece for this video and for the recent run on Mercs of Mischief. And there's definitely a lot that you can take out of it as far as inspiration and themes and ideas, but not so much you can take out of it for stat blocks, items, and places. You could get a lot of maps. It's the thing's maps galore. But yeah, that's it. So thank you all so much for watching Puckin Modules. Tune in next month. We'll have another one. I think the next one is the giant one. Storm King's Thunder. There we go. And we'll see you all then. Until next time, class dismissed.